Hey guys, I am back with books that I have read in 2019, what year is this? 2020, part 2. I usually have a video that comes out at the end of the year that goes over all of the books that I've read during that year, but for whatever reason, 2020, while everyone else is having trouble reading, I have been reading more than I have ever read before, which meant if I made one video at the end, it would be like 2 hours long. So I've decided to split it up into parts. Part 1 is this one here, I'll link it right there. And this one is part 2, what I've read from May to August. So let's get to it. First up is Illuminae by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. I know what you're thinking, this book was written in 2015. What took you so friggin' long to read this thing? I think it was daunting. It's massive, and despite the fact that it's not like jam-packed with text, it's still 600 pages. Also, everyone recommends this book. That's a lot of hype on something, and I feel weirdly put off when people are like screaming their love from balconies about something. I don't know why I'm like that. I'm learning to be better. The book was awesome. I loved it. So first off, I started reading this book in May, and what a time to just skim the back of the book and be like, I'm gonna read it anyway, it's fine, we're gonna go through with this. Not really realizing what it's about, only to open this thing up and realize it deals with the deadly plague. So this book is about a group of refugees, 2 lovebirds in particular. Alright, they broke up before the book started, but they're still planning for each other. And they are racing across the galaxy, being chased by an enemy warship, and they're trying to get to a jump point. But the biggest threat to the fleet may end up being the damaged AI on their ship that's there supposed to be protecting them. This story is told through a collected dossier of files that have been gathered on this particular event that have been placed in chronological order. So you've got like emails, IMs between characters, interviews, surveillance stuff, medical reports, journals from the characters, all placed in chronological order, so that you have this overarching story as you're seeing it through that description. So between those things and like every now and then you have like interesting things from the AI itself. The AI has its own like input into the story. You end up with a wild ride through this narrative. I'm a huge fan of books that are formatted uniquely like this. There's a book, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, that is like a formatting tornado, and his book is so cool because all of his formatting choices have to do with where you are emotionally as the reader while you're reading his book. This is very similar to that. I'm always going to be a fan of when an author takes on and especially succeeds in a literary challenge like this. There's another book that did this by Dave Eggers called Your Fathers, Where Are They? And the Prophets, Do They Live Forever? That was a hostage book that was completely written in dialogue, where it's just, you don't have the ability to describe the room, you have to do it through characters. And I love that kind of literary play that authors do, so I knew that I would love this book just based on that alone. So here I am, ready to read it. I'm excited. I know I'm gonna love it. And I crack open the first page and I hate it. I hated it. It was so much information at once. I was so overwhelmed. I was so lost that I actually ended up telling myself, no, you just force yourself through this chapter, and if you still hate it, then we can put it down. It's fine. So I forced myself through the first part. And then they have this weird one-time only like Wikipedia backstory dump that I did not love, but I understand why it was there. And once I got past that, I was hooked. And then I was reading like 100 or 200 pages a day. It was crazy. There are a lot of rises in action and tension right up to the very end. And then you've got this AI that's adding in this chaos and trickery and like an existential breakdown for an artificial intelligence system. There are definitely a few moments that they like had to push the envelope a little bit that I don't believe would be realistic for a dossier. There was an IM between 2 characters where one character's like, okay, I'm gonna tell you the plan. And the other character's like, okay. And then we cut. And like in a real dossier, I mean, that information would be there. But they left it for tension. I get it. I had to suspend my disbelief a little bit as far as the dossier goes, but I'm not upset at it. I really enjoyed this, and I'm very excited to pick up the second one. Next up is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Now this is the second book in the duology, starting with Six of Crows. Now I loved Six of Crows. It was gorgeously rendered. The plot, the characters, the heist, absolutely adored that book. If you read Six of Crows and you're thinking about reading Crooked Kingdom, 100% my opinion is that you should pick it up, but it's a different type of book. I did not feel quite as strongly about Crooked Kingdom, but I think that I didn't feel as strongly about it because it was a different style of book. So we are back with our same team of misfits, outcasts, and criminals in this book. This time their goal is to free the lives of the indentured Grisha, including someone very important to them from the first book that we were left off with a hook, and take down the rich merchants that have wronged and betrayed them. I don't want to spoil the first book by talking about the second one, so that's as vague as you can get. Now, Six of Crows had this gorgeously rendered heist where we followed the characters through a series of drawbacks as they were trying to get something that meant a lot to each of them. There are still heist moments, and their plans still get thwarted, just like the first book. If you like heists, there's still heists in it, but their end goal wasn't as clear. It wasn't cut and dry, nor could it be. It was impossible to do that, because in this book the characters don't want a thing like they wanted in the first book. They want an idea. Taking down a merchant's entire life's work takes a lot of deceptions, a lot of strings that need to be cut, a lot of working from the inside out, wanting to succeed in getting your version of an idea that you want. Getting that justice means something different to different people, and it's going to mean something different to all of the characters. So having an end goal of a certain idea is abstract in and of itself. So you have a lot of different things that you have to get done to get to an idea that's already abstract as is. It's not this perfect retrieval of a thing, and it's not simple. So that's just the nature of the story she was trying to tell. It's not as simple as the first book. One of the things that I do love about Leigh Bardugo's writing is she has like a miraculous way with dialogue. She could set up a whole group of people talking and have like this beginning and end of what the dialogue needs to be about, and be able to like sidebar into side conversations and have like witty remarks and then come back into the big conversation like seamlessly. It's awe-inspiring, honestly. There was a point where a couple characters were talking about a book that they liked, and I got into that book. So I was like reading a book, getting into the characters, and then getting into a book that they're just talking about. That alone is so well-handed, deftly maneuvered. In the end, it was a great read. The duology itself is fantastic. The end of Crooked Kingdom sets up a lot of plot threads for Kingdom of Scars. So if you're going forward with the Grisha verse that Bardugo sets up, it's a good book to read just to get a little bit of input before you read Kingdom of Scars. It's definitely worth a read. I 100% loved the first book a lot more. If you're looking to read Six of Crows, 100% go do that, and don't skip out on the second book. It's definitely worth a read if you liked the first one. Just know that the plot is laid out a lot differently. It's not a full heist book, it's a lot of smaller heists in a game full of societal deception. Next up is Starflight by Melissa Landers. Full disclosure, I read this book in like January, and I have some thoughts, and I needed to figure out my thoughts before I put it in a video. So it didn't make it into part one. I still read it this year, so this still counts. It's fine. But I'm ready to talk about it now. This book is about an orphan mechanic with felony tattoos who indentures herself to a rich quarterback, and they both end up landing on like this cruddy ship full of outlaws chasing down some mysterious coordinates deep in space. It was a dual POV between the mechanic, Solara, and that quarterback, Doran. It was a surprisingly short book, considering the ambitious plot on the back and the fact that it is a science fiction space opera. I liked that they had pirates in space. I don't think you can go wrong with pirates in space. I also liked some of the plot elements, and there were some conceptual things that I liked. They had these temporal lobe limiters that the bounty hunters had, which was a really cool concept that I love. I also liked how there were like multiple groups of people chasing after their ship of outlaws, which added a lot of tension and a lot of interest and intrigue. This book also has a lot of comedy into it. The characters are witty, the situations are funny. Having some humor was very helpful. But there were 5 things that I had trouble with in this book. Number 1, a lack in world building. As I could have guessed with this ambitious plot and the size of the book, I should have known that there wouldn't be things painted out enough. A lot of the settings and backstory and everything just was not there. There's not a lot of techie verbiage going on either. I know people who don't read sci-fi, that want to read sci-fi, are really turned off by that heavy world building and techie verbiage. So this book did not have that. So if that interests you, I guess that could be a good thing. Number 2, Solara is a dick. So Doran is set up to be this kind of privileged ass. I'm gonna cuss a lot, I'm sorry. That has bullied her in her life. He also, in the beginning, tries to abandon her on a refueling station. Like, he's obviously not a good person. So it's set up, but it's not fully painted out. He ends up losing his memory. And the moment he has his memory gone, she begins being an ass to him. So it was this smug revenge that had me disliking her from the very beginning. I just feel like how you treat people in a vulnerable situation says a lot more about you as a person than it does about them and what they deserve. I'm sure some people like this flip. I'm sure people love to see justice served for bullies, but it didn't feel like that. It felt ugly. So I start out the story following this privileged bully as one POV and a cruel girl as the other POV, and I just didn't like either of the characters. The third thing, amnesia. I'm starting to think in January when I read this that maybe I just don't like the amnesia story trope. It feels like a very convenient plot device for a character who is unlikable to basically be turned off and turned back on again. Now I mention this because a later book in this video has an amnesia storyline that I did like. It felt a little bit kind of fan fiction-y. If you like that type of trope, then maybe you like this amnesia storyline. I just didn't think it was for me. Number 4, the bully redemption arc. We're constantly getting dragged away from the plot to come back and check in on the romance between our main characters, and I didn't want it. I wanted to be off in the plot. The author is primarily a romance writer, so I think that might have a big thing to do with it. I think that if you are a romance reader, if you like romance novels, and you're kind of starting to get into the idea of sci-fi, you want to test out the waters, this might be a really good book for you because it has so much romance in it. It's so heavily involved with that amnesia storyline. The bully redemption arc are very heavy in here. It's like romance in a spaceship. Now the last thing, number 5, that I didn't like, I'm not going to get too into. It's very author versus like normal reader coming at a book. There was a lot of telling in this book. Telling versus showing. There were a lot of stock gestures. She turned her head, movements of the body. I don't want to get too into this because I don't want to explain what telling versus showing is, but it felt like I wanted to be in the book. I wanted to be enveloped in all of the details, and it felt kind of like there was a wall and the author's just telling me what happened. I'll use an example. The characters will come into a room and there will be a fridge and an oven and a microwave. And then the author will say, it didn't take long for the character to realize that this was a kitchen. I'm like, you painted it out for us. We know it's a kitchen. It's okay to just say it's a kitchen. The character doesn't have to realize it's a kitchen. You did a good job. And I couldn't tell if the author didn't trust herself to convey different things or didn't trust the reader to understand what she was conveying. The times when there was good setting, world building, there was some kind of trust that was misplaced there. But in the end, I think that very trope heavy. It felt a little fan fiction-y, a lot of romance, but it did have good qualities too. So if those things sound like something you're like, actually, I kind of sound like I'd be into that, then pick it up and give it a whirl. I think it wasn't for me, but I think that's also a personal, subjective decision. So there you go. So next up is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. So I wanted to read this quote first from the book. Not every battle's grand, not every weapon fierce. Even we who fight wars through time forget the value of a word in the right moment. A rattle in the right car engine, a nail in the right horseshoe. It's so easy to crush a planet that you may overlook the value of a whisper to a snowbank. The correspondence in this was gorgeous. The two main characters, Red and Blue, are opposing agents in a time war, and they're the best of their kind. And they've begun writing letters to each other to find during their travel. Letters so secret and embedded in the world that their superiors could never find them. Letters that are hidden in the hot embers of lava, in the steam rising out of tea, and the age lines of trees. Their only mission individually is to win this war, but as the book goes on, their relationship to each other shifts and changes. This story is remarkably beautiful, poignant, and romantic. It has this star-crossed lovers vibe. It's definitely literary. The language in it almost feels ethereal, like it's hard to grasp onto. There's something really poetic about it, and it often like flaunts with being perfectly tied down. A lot of the feelings and sometimes the details themselves are fully realized, but any kind of setting like time or place was not. The details were always lofty, like grasping for leaves in a wind tunnel. Like you could maybe get a detail here and there. And I thought it was a really perfect way to tell the reader that details like time and place in a time war are not that important to the characters or to the book itself. In the end, I felt like it was such a beautiful book. Obviously, I have all my tabs. There were so many gorgeous lines in the book that I wanted to remember, but I do highly recommend it. Okay, I'm back. I had a little bit of a technical issue, but we're back and strong. So next up is The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. I have seen this book everywhere. A lot of people have recommended it, including a lot of authors I follow, like V.E. Schwab recommended it, Roshni Chokshi recommended it, and it sounded really interesting. On the back, it talks about Carolyn, who is our main character, who spent her life locked away in an infinite library, forced to study at the feet of a man who might be God. And then it talks about Steve, who's like this ordinary guy, and Carolyn shows up in his life, and she has a tempting offer, a pair of red rubber galoshes, and $327,000. And basically, they're swept up in a war with powerful forces against the universe, yada yada yada, all of those bags of chips. Conceptually, I loved this book. I loved all of the ideas, all of the individual scenes, and I loved the overarch that is, revealed at the end. There was a bunch of like crazy randomness to it that was just so ideal for my chaotic brain. I was like, yes, 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 that's random, I love that. I loved that these kids who have been tucked away from the rest of the world in the library for so long, and they're used to wearing like robes or being nude, that when they go out into the world, they don't know what to wear. So you end up like with these big buff guys wearing tutus. This is obviously an adult book. It's not young adult. Maybe I've been reading young adult for a little too long, but there is so much gore in this book. It is wild. There are no shortcuts taken. If there are intestines, you will see them. If there is blood splatter, you're going to smell it. It was so gory in some scenes, and it was beautiful. It was so well done that like it was a lot. Additionally, Steve, he is hilarious. He was so witty, and I loved him anytime, especially when he was talking to Carolyn or the lions. And yes, I said lions. He was hilarious. I am pretty sure that I followed this whole book because of Steve. So a lot of people reading this book feel like they're thrown in They don't know what's going on. The plot is not soft for you. It does not walk you and handhold you into its world. You are lost from the beginning. A lot of people mentioned wanting to like DNF it, you know, do not finish it, like halfway through. And I think that I might have been one of them. And I wanted to figure out why. I had to logic my way through that. I noticed that everything that's on the back of the book, all of that plot, all of that story is actually wrapped up by page 50. It felt like all of my questions, not only from back flap copy, but from like the beginnings, everything got answered too quickly, which seems backwards considering a lot of people felt like they were floundering through it. But I feel like those are two different things. Building your world so your readers know how it works is different than leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for interest. So with all of those questions that arose, tidied up plot-wise early on in the book, I needed to find a reason to keep reading, and I needed to find it fast. And at that moment where you're looking for a reason to keep reading because your plot, the thing that drew you into the book, is no longer there, those chapters were so important, and they were about like deer. And the deer are really important, and I get it now that I've read the whole book, but you don't realize it while you're reading about them. And it's like everything got tidied up, and now I'm reading about deer, and nothing drew me into the story. So I ended up continuing reading because A, there was a whole lot of book left, and I had to figure out what else was going to happen, and B, because of Steve. Man, I was here for Steve, but the reality was that I had trouble caring about 50 pages in. There were also some things in the beginning that felt very repetitive, like little details that I was like, okay, I get it. You've battered me over the head with the fact that Margaret stinks. I get it. Despite the fact that I felt like the story needed things plot-wise, I still liked it. I think that the climax was great. It boiled up to a breaking point, and everything came crashing down. Everything kind of tied in together. Everything had a reason for being there. I loved the idea of the main character taking vengeance on someone that wronged her and was fully ready to let the world burn for it. I loved everything that happened after the climax too, when we get to see into the library, and therefore into Carolyn's world. There was so much character development that happened after the climax, and like a lot of the weird little quirks about Carolyn were kind of written off, and I'm not going to tell you how because that's a spoiler, but it made me feel like I never really knew that character. And then everything after the climax I loved about her, and I wanted to love her during the main plot too. And I felt like I would have liked some of that information sprinkled in so that I could love her throughout the main plot instead of like learning everything afterwards. It fully felt like two story arcs. It felt like what happened and then why it happened. In the end, I'm really happy I read it. I loved it conceptually, loved the end, loved the randomness, I loved the gore. I am here for that. I wish the art was a little smoother, and I kind of wish some of the details had been handled differently, but I do recommend it if you are looking for something that is just crazy. It was a crazy read. I haven't read anything else like it. It was a wild ride, but this novel makes you work. It makes you work for it. But yeah, if you're here for that kind of stuff, then definitely check it out. Alright guys, so last up is my July read, which was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This book was Groundhog's Day meets a murder mystery party. So Evelyn Hardcastle is going to die every day, and Aidan Bishop, our main character, only has 8 days to solve those murders. But every day he wakes up in the body of a different guest. There are other guests who are racing him to the solution, and some guests who are trying to help, but which ones can he trust? So this was a great book. It is massive, and I read it in like a week. I don't often read mystery, so I can't compare it to other mysteries, but I know that a lot of other reviewers are loving it, so I'm here to say that I also loved it. I was immediately hooked because the opening was actually in search of someone who wasn't Evelyn. The first witnessed murder wasn't a name on, there's like a supplied guest list at the beginning because it's like a fancy dinner. So they have like a map in the beginning, and they also have a guest list. and the first like murdered person isn't on here. So I was immediately intrigued. And it's not just one murder. There are a lot of murders in this book that we have to figure out. And there are murders from the past that are resurfacing that all tie in. All the pieces and clues I think were masterfully handled. I didn't notice anything that didn't come back into play. I mean, I can't even imagine what editing this monster was like. So this is where we get back to the amnesia story trope. This character wakes up and he doesn't remember anything. This is different than Starflight. This is using amnesia as a necessity to plot. And it's different than most amnesia tropes that I see, in the sense that this was a necessity to the story as a whole and not being used as a convenient plot trope. So the main character wakes up in the body of a different guest, right? A different host. My favorite thing that Turton did was how Aiden, our main character, struggles to deal with the different personality types of those hosts. As more days passed, it got harder and harder for Aiden to control his host. So you've got headstrong personalities at the end that are really difficult to deal with. He just considered how the minds of different people work and how they view the world and how everyone is different, and then incorporated it into the hosts, seen through the eyes of a main character that we really don't know that much about. And it was deftly handled, excellently well done. It's fine. Excellently well done. Like I said, I don't read that many mysteries. I found this on a shelf. I fell in love with it because the cover is so pretty. Look at it. The gold and like the kind of 1920s vibe. And I definitely recommend it. It is a monster, but like I said, I read this in a week and I don't read things in a week. So I highly recommend that. So you might have noticed that that one I said that I read in July, and this is supposed to be 4 months, which is May, June, July, and August. I'm not finished with my August read. I'm really disappointed. I tried. I am reading Children of Blood and Bone, finally. And I'm really excited about it. I am so close to being finished with this. I tried so hard to get this book into this video and I didn't. I'm really excited to talk about it in the next video, but you won't see it until like December. So I'm sorry, but I am reading it. I am excited about it. So I had to at least give it a shout out. So otherwise, these are the books that I read in the last 4 months since May. And I guess it was really just 3 months if Children of Blood and Bone has been for August. So I'm reading like a monster. I don't know why. Either way, that is all I have for you guys today. And since this is my last video of August, I will just jump in here as a reminder and let you know I'm taking September off for my editing. I have to get my book edited for an editor, but I will be back very soon, and hopefully you guys have a great beginning of our fall season, end of summer, wherever your heads are at. Maybe you're on pumpkin spice lattes, maybe you're still in the pool. Either way, I hope you guys are doing well, and I will see you guys next time. See you later. Every 4 months I'm coming out with an episode. This one is episode.